Greetings. My name is Barry Barton, and my topic is the mining bargain and natural resources law. I'm happy to make a contribution to the conference, even though it is a bit disembodied. I should add that I'm engaged in the study of mineral activity as a researcher, but I'm neither for nor against extractive industries and their players. In addition, I will speak as a mere lawyer and not try to set up as a social scientist, but I appreciate the interdisciplinary character of the program that's being put together and am glad to be involved. Let me bring up a handful of slides that I have got ready and hope that they behave all right. This is the Waikato River, after which our university is named, looking north towards Huntly, one of New Zealand's mining towns, coal mines, and the power station showing there on the left. On the right, the slopes going up to Mount Taupuri, the maunga, the sacred maunga of the Waikato Tainui people. One of the key things about the legal, institutional, and commercial framework for mining is that owners and operators tend to be different people. The owners of mineral resources are usually the government, the nation state. Not always. There are some exceptions in US and Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and in South Africa, they finesse the ownership question with custodianship, but it's a pretty general pattern. Whereas the operators are almost invariably companies involved in mining. There are exceptions. There are state-owned mining corporations, mainly running operating mines rather than doing exploration work, but even they are few and far between. They have different incentives, the owner and the operator. Their interests are not the same, so you have split incentives, if you like to use the economists' talk, and their interests need to be brought together, and that is in effect what creates what I call the mining bargain. And it's relatively distinctive to the extractive industries. You get it in oil and gas, forestry to some extent as well, but it's uncommon. You don't get it in manufacturing, you don't get it in services, professional services, retail. But to perceive it there does help us understand what's going on, what companies are doing, what governments are doing, and what communities are doing. Why is this? Why do we have this divergence? Well, I think the answer is expertise. Mineral resources are not self-evident. They're not lying around in the ground very often. And it takes a great deal of effort and capability, scientific, technical capability in geology, geophysics, and so forth to figure out where they are. And in particular, even if there is something there, can it be turned into a mine? Can it be developed economically and operated as a mine? In addition, we're dealing about hundreds of different mineral targets, iron and coal, but copper, silver, lead, zinc, lithium, rare earth elements. They all have their individual characteristics, and there are people who have a capability and expertise in exploring them and bringing them into production. Same goes for finance. Especially at the exploration end, mining finance is extremely risky. Ordinarily, the companies investing in a particular exploration project pretty well expect to lose their money. They are slightly surprised if they find that they actually do have something viable on their hands. Of course, if they do, then they have lucked out big time and will own a share of a gold mine or whatever it is. So it does pay off, but it is exceptionally high risk. You don't take your life savings or your retirement funds and invest them in a small mineral exploration startup. When people do, it turns sad. So it's highly specialized type of finance. There are not many people doing it, globally speaking, and owners certainly don't want to get into that sort of thing. Governments in particular don't want to maintain a huge band of expertise, and they don't want to invest taxpayers' money in high-risk activities. So you get the owners saying, well, who does know about this stuff? Who does want to take these risks? Where do we find those people, those companies? And very often it is internationally. So that is one of the drivers of the international character of the mineral industry, and why a host government is often dealing with companies from elsewhere. The form that this mining bargain takes, sometimes in one-off negotiated agreements, more often in mining legislation, it has the benefit of applying general rules to everybody involved and in a pretty transparent way. We'll come back to that because it's an important point. In the content of the bargain, and indeed what you will find in your usual mining statute is statements about ownership of minerals, availability, then what sort of licenses or permits or leases or claims or dispositions that you can get, and the criteria on which they are to be allocated. You know, the minister must consider the following matters. The minister may not allocate a license to anybody, blah, blah, blah. Then the obligations of the license holder. This is where you start to see the parties' different objectives. The government generally will want to see action fairly quickly and will not want the company to sit on the property. Conversely, the company will want to take its time. It may want to rush, but it wants to decide. It wants the discretion in the matter. A government will often see mineral activity, opening up a new mine, as a matter of regional strategy and regional and community development. Companies will accept that, and sometimes that will give them benefits, such as new roads being built, but they don't want to get dragged into a whole bunch of complications outside their particular operation. Similarly, with Indigenous interests, First Nations interests, the company and the government may be pulling in different directions. Sometimes the government wanting to ensure that Indigenous rights are respected. Sometimes the other way around, actually, the government taking a hard line to avoid setting precedents, and the company being much more willing to lean in. Sometimes the company will want to go in and high grade the whole property and be on its way after 5 years. Sometimes the government will want a more measured approach to maximize the benefit to the nation from the resource. So we find these things embodied in law, and it's an interesting mix of sort of private law and public law of property. The proprietor is doling out rights to companies. And that's very different from a lot of spheres of law, like environmental law, where it's purely regulatory. Right, so the financial aspects of the bargain, we also find the two parties finding a middle path. A lot of the issues from the company point of view concern risk, the risks, the geological risks, but also the commodity risks. All the extractive industries are intensely cyclical, and a mine that at the beginning of the year looked as if it was going to be really profitable turns out to be unprofitable by the time it opens, with no taxes or royalties to be paid, and tears all around. So that imposes considerable tension in the relationship. Companies are wanting to manage risk, for example, if its exploration is successful, then it wants relative certainty that it is going to be able to develop the property. It doesn't want to be left dangling, waiting for the minister to exercise further discretionary power, which may be open, or it may actually be not open and suspect. Changes in the bargain inevitably raise questions about security of tenure or investment certainty on the one hand, and sovereignty over natural resources and regulatory certainty on the other. The bargain itself is kind of up for grabs. A lot of attention has gone in the last, say, 30 years into investor-state dispute settlement procedures, especially bilateral investment treaties and multilateral investment treaties. They, for good reason, have earned themselves quite a bad name. However, modern ones are trying to produce cleaner process and more consistent results, and to ensure that the genuine interests of a nation state can be protected. What is best, however, in many ways, is to ensure that disputes don't arise, and if they do, they can be adequately dealt with within the nation's political and legal framework. So it requires sound political institutions and reliable judicial institutions, courts that are generally accepted. And in fact, that is something that is very much on the shopping list of many community groups. They would rather have incorruptible courts and ones where you can get a remedy without too much delay, rather than it being otherwise. The way that the bargain is made needs to be rethought in considerable ways. If it is made in a secretive, confidential way, and if it's special rates, special deal for a particular company, no one will know whether that is the best deal that could have been struck, and no one will know whether they are getting a cozy deal for whatever reason. So the way that the bargain is made is important. Another important aspect of it is that it is a bilateral relationship. And there are two elements of that I think are worth exploring. First of all, the relationship between government departments will often reflect the fact that the mines department, or whatever it's called, kind of expects to be the counterparty in a bilateral relationship and expects to have control over mining matters. It will say that it takes into account the concerns of other departments such as Indigenous affairs, community affairs, social welfare, environment, but there is a sort of a track record of them doing it their own way, going their own sweet way, being something of a law unto themselves. So the fact that it's a bilateral relationship doesn't quite fit with the complexities of government. Even more concerning is the fact that there are a lot of other parties involved in a mining project that are not part of the relationship, especially communities, Indigenous communities, First Nations, tribes, neighbours, and that is an inherent complication for mining operations. In fact, you can say that it is a bilateral arrangement in a multilateral pluralistic world. If that suggests that it can be swept away, then it's not that easy. It will inevitably be part of arrangements so long as we have owners and operators separately. In fact, companies, the better companies, are often ahead of governments in understanding that they have a web of relationships that they must have regard to. A lot of them are acutely aware of their vulnerability on matters of social license, respect for human rights, corporate social responsibility. There's plenty of room to argue that they are not doing enough and they're doing it for poor reasons. Fair enough. My main point here, though, is that quite often they are doing more than host governments are doing themselves. So it's paradoxical. Thirdly, in thinking the bargain, we need to consider that there's a whole new agenda emerging for a circular economy, for climate change mitigation and adaptation, transition to an entirely new energy world. We need new mineral policies, minerals and materials policies. How those will work in relation to the mining bargain, frankly, I'm not quite sure. There's a wonderful, interesting research agenda out there, but these issues are now becoming acute. Few countries have significant minerals policies, and it's not entirely clear how they make a difference. Let me just say a word about natural resources law, which is kind of where I find my scholarly home. It deals not only with minerals, but oil and gas, water, forestry, public lands, grazing lands in some countries. And in fact, its primary concern is this relationship that I'm talking about. But as lawyers tend to do, it's not terribly theorized. There is a tradition of natural resources law being about making the world safe for mining companies and the like, and making the deal happen. However, it has evolved. It can actually take pride of place in sort of ecological approaches because to environmental management, because it is very much place-based, more perhaps than sort of general pollution legislation. I've had reason to ponder the changes in writing about Canadian mining law, and what you hear time and again from all parties is a preoccupation not so much with the old natural resources law about getting mining claims, and which you used to, well, in some parts you still do, stake out on the ground, and the disputes between miners, which are a lot of fun, but kind of fading into the background. What companies are really concerned about these days, I mean, they need to secure their land base, but their first questions, time and again, will be about what is the relationship with the First Nations, with Indigenous communities? Is there an impact and benefit agreement in place? And secondly, what about land use permitting? How far has that advanced? Do you have your mine permits? And reclamation obligations, have they been thrashed out? And thirdly, what is your general social license in the region? So there has been evolution, and I trust there is more to come. So there's an interesting complex agenda for change in relation to extractive industries, mining among them. My list there is by no means a full or complete one. Other participants in the conference are going much in real depth into a lot of them. What I suggest is that the existence of this mining bargain and its consequences be part of the consideration about how to bring those changes about. So there's my 2 bits worth. I hope it's been of some use, and I look forward to hearing what other members of our little community have got to say about their topics. Thank you.